The shrine is actually a fraternity, and people sometimes get confused about the fraternity versus our hospital setting. But our fraternity is a great organization that does philanthropic work and supports 22 hospitals throughout North America. So we have 22 hospitals that do orthopedic, spinal cord injury, cleft lip and palate, and burn work throughout North America. We say North America because we have a hospital in Montreal. We also have a hospital in Mexico City. This is our Shriners Hospital here in Chicago. This particular hospital is an orthopedic facility, so we see a lot of kids who have disabilities like cerebral palsy, spina bifida, osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bone disease. We also see a lot of kids with spinal cord injuries. That happens to be my area of expertise. And we also have a cleft lip and palate program. We see kids who are born with cleft lip and palate and have a lot of orthognathic issues and face issues. So that's what we do at our facility. Why Shriners? And why scuba diving? Some people kind of go, what are you talking about? Aren't you supposed to just do regular old rehab, throw them in a rehab department, put them on parallel bars, make them learn how to use their wheelchairs, do some fun little things, put pegs in little holes and be done? That is not what we're about at all. We learned very early on in our experience in working with kids, and I think this is very applicable to adults, that a high quality of life has a lot to do with play. How many would say that your quality of life is super, super high because of the chores you have? How many would say it's super, super high, other than me, because of the work you do? That's impressive. A few of us. That's exciting. Good for us. How many would say it has to do with what you do in your leisure time with your family and how you do your recreation? Yeah, that has a lot to do with how we feel about our quality of life. Now, in the very late 1980s, myself and one of our therapeutic recreation specialists started something called the Sports and Conditioning Camp at our hospital. What we felt, and what we didn't know for sure, but what we felt was that our kids who sustained spinal cord injuries were really, really active prior to their getting hurt. And somehow, once they had their accident, diving accident, car accident, diving as in into a pool, car accident, could be virus, transverse myelitis, Guillain-Barré, all sorts of different ways, falls, somehow they weren't as active. And we were concerned about that because we saw that sedentary lifestyle not being good. And we didn't want our kids to be sitting around doing nothing. We didn't want them to be waiting for a cure for their particular disability. And we were also concerned about the medical effects of them being so sedentary and not working out or doing anything. Homebound recreation was an issue. Kids who started to use wheelchairs ended up not going in and out of their houses, not being involved with their communities, their peers, and other people who they had been involved with previously. So we were concerned about that, which made us concerned about social isolation. And that concerned us for anxiety and depression. And we didn't want to see that in our patients or in anybody for that matter. We wanted our kids to be able to be independent, be socially engaged, go back and do the things they were doing prior to their spinal cord injury. Now, we like to say we were sort of on the cusp, because remember, I said that was the late 80s. Was anybody else talking about sedentary lifestyle and recreation and leisure and play back in the late 80s? But here's what we know today. These are leisure characteristics of our youth, able-bodied youth across the board. In the last 25 years, the amount of leisure time kids have, time to just hang out, do what they want, participate in activities, has taken a huge hit. We also know that they have more adult supervised activities, less playing out in your yard, hanging out with your friends, going down to the creek. Some of that has to do with important things like safety, but other things have to do with the change in our economics, two-parent families both working, one-parent families, one parent working. Activities are sequenced close together. We all can think of, hopefully not our own children, but some kids out there who almost have pseudo resumes by the time they hit middle school of all the activities they've participated in. It's going to help get them into college, I'm sure of it. Unstructured playtime, the go out, hang out, and come home when the lights come on, those street lights come on, pretty much stopped existing. Interestingly enough, because of that, organized sport went up. 50% increase in organized sports. So kids were really starting to participate in organized basketball, in tennis, and all sorts of different structured, organized, what we call formal activities. But interestingly enough, when you think about that, oftentimes those kids are taken to those activities by a parent, driven, right? You get to the baseball field, you play for a while. No offense to you baseball fans, but there's not a whole lot of movement on a baseball field. And then you get back in the car and you go back home, and then what do? Now, I didn't put the next one in because this is a very, 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 very new study that just came out. And we used to say 60% of their time is spent watching TV, and we have no idea how much additional time they spend on video games, on the computer, on their eye touches, on what we now call screen time. So what have been the results of all those trends we see in our youth? We all know obesity and type 2 disability, is reaching epidemic levels for everyone, for all of us, not just adults, but for kids as well. Preschool kids have doubled their obesity rates. School-age kids have doubled their obesity rates from 7 to 15%, and our adolescents have tripled. There's talk about nature deficit disorder. Has everybody heard this term before? Nature deficit disorder, it's about not getting out and being in nature, not touching and feeling and experiencing in a variety of different ways. That our kids are doing so much screen time, so much that's isolating in that sense that they really don't truly experience nature. There's a wonderful book out there called Last Child in the Woods. I would recommend you all read it. We've seen increases in anxiety and depression across the board. Anxiety rates for kids in general are about 13%, the general population. Depression rates are about, depending on what study you look at, between 6 and 9%, and those are all increased. Concerns about social skill development. How do you develop your social skills if all you do is stare at a computer screen all day? Right? Maybe you're doing some social networking, but what sort of social skills does that truly develop for our youth? So clearly a concern there. And then the issue of cultural autism, and that's a term that really talks about you don't get to directly experience it. You don't taste it, you don't touch it, you don't feel it. Now stop and think about sitting in front of your computer and playing a scuba game. And now think about being in the water and experiencing what we all experience when we dive. And think about the differences there and how you experience that completely differently because you can taste, you can touch, you can feel. So what about spinal cord injury specifically? Why is this important to me as a spinal cord person? And this has to do with the fact that we know from our research that when you sustain a spinal cord injury, whether you're 2 or whether you're 17, it can create a disruption in your developmental milestones. And we want to be able to make sure that we minimize that disruption as much as possible. We also know from long-term outcome studies that we do at our facility, our kids who are 24 years of age and older, we survey them every year with a variety of things. What we know is one of the areas that is most closely related to their overall life satisfaction is their recreation participation. Recreation therapists in the room, feel free to pat yourselves on the back right now. So here's some of the things we've seen specifically in our population that made us say, scuba diving is great and I love to dive. But scuba diving can really be therapeutic for our kids. How do we make it therapeutic? Why would a hospital support a scuba system? Why would they say, sure, you can take your patients to do a Discover Scuba in a pool. You can take your patients to Key Largo, Florida. Why would they allow that unless it was therapeutic? And our studies have shown for us the reasons our kids need these sorts of experiences.